Well, good morning. It's still morning. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. I'm hoping a bunch of us are joining us on the live stream as well. First of all, thank you very much for joining us here at Couchbase Connect. And number two, being here in, like Peter said, the most awesome track today, which is the analytics track. As I'm sure you've heard in the keynote earlier today and then read in the press, we are announcing Couchbase Analytics today, and it's going to be available in the next, before the end of the year, in the winter sometime. We are in beta right now and are essentially working on getting the bits ready to ship them for GA. What I want to do, or the way we've structured this track, is I'm going to go through an overview and introduction of Couchbase Analytics, and then I'm going to have I have the pleasure of working with some really talented colleagues who are going to come up stage. And Till Westman, who is the Senior Director for Engineering at Couchbase and leads the analytics team, is going to give you a bit of a deep dive into the query language. And then Mike Carey, who is our consulting prof, who's been the brains behind this from his Asterisk DB days. He now calls himself a Couchbase Analytics person, is going to talk about the architecture, the reasons for making the decisions that have been made. So if during the question and answer session I get some questions where I know they're being covered in Mike and Till's tracks or their sessions, I will defer to those and then take as many as I'd like to. And I hope you enjoyed the demo during the keynote. What I can also do is take you through the process of how that whole thing came together. Once we've gone through a few slides and show you exactly what we showed on stage, which is it's really simple to get analytics going with Couchbase. And I'd argue that the customer experience that we're providing for managing and getting up and running with analytics is better than anything else that's out there. All right, without further ado, I think the tagline over there is bringing no ETL to no SQL. I'm hoping you got a little bit of an insight into what we mean by that by the keynote presentation earlier today. And at the end of this session, you'll probably have a better appreciation for the claim that we're making, that we're actually bringing no ETL to no SQL with Couchbase Analytics. So before I delve into the what it is and how did we get there, I think one question that's on everybody's mind, which was in my mind when I took up the job of managing the analytics product as well, was why analytics? So let me go back to the Venn diagram that was provided earlier today as well. There's the transactional databases. This is all the system of records, the RDBMS systems that are out there. There's the analytical databases, which are actually transforming data from your transactional database and then getting it ready for the types of queries that you'd like to run off those. And then there is the engagement database where Couchbase fits in, where we're providing the vehicle for you to store all of your interactions in Couchbase. And then with Couchbase Analytics, we're providing you the ability to run queries off that. So if I look at these Venn diagrams, with analytics, what we're doing is we're impinging a little bit towards the analytical database part of the circle over there. Analytics is a huge ecosystem. There is the visualization piece, there is the machine learning piece, there's a bunch of connectors that you need to build in to bring data from disparate sources. There are special solutions that do that. But from a Couchbase perspective, what we're doing is we're giving you the ability to essentially be able to ask questions of all of the operational data that is being stored in Couchbase without knowing what those questions are ahead of time. So let me start with the value proposition. And as I talk through the value proposition, I'm hoping you've seen some of these slides before. I've had the chance to meet a lot of our early customers, and this has resonated really well with them. Where I start with what's their current solution. So what I've called traditional analytical solution or their current analytical infrastructure. It starts at the top left-hand corner where you have a business application. A business application is generating a bunch of operations data. That operations data is in many cases JSON. When you have the ability to store JSON documents like you do with Couchbase, you're storing it in that natural JSON format on the Couchbase cluster. From there, there is a fairly complex process of essentially getting, like I call, dressing that data up for analytical processing, which is, I think the easiest way to describe it is ETL, the extract, transform, and load paradigm, where you get the data from your operational system. And this is where we try to, in this graphic, showed that the ops data and the ops storage is all JSON. But then when it comes to the ETL job, the output of that is a relational schema or a rigid schema, where you know exactly what sort of queries you'd like to ask of your data, and then the way the data is stored is essentially tied into that. So you have the whole process of transforming your operational schema, in some cases pre-aggregating data, in other cases just changing it on the fly, in other cases maybe bringing in data from other systems and enriching the data to essentially create the analytical schema, if you will. And then once you've figured all of that, that's probably, I think, one way of thinking in the analytical database is also the data warehouse. And then from there, you have a bunch of batching that needs to be done to visualize that in a visualization tool. The batch out here is implied from the fact that by the time your data gets from your operational database into your analytical database, you've already lost, or you already have a lag time over there. You build that lag time into how an analytics tool would interact with that data, and then you're seeing batching at multiple levels as well. So with Couchbase Analytics, we want to, if I was to describe in one sentence what's the problem that we're solving, we want to not have to move data from your operational store to move it to a separate analytical store and then start running queries on that. We'd like to essentially consolidate all of this, bring in a new type of node, which is an analytics node that is a special node that is tailor-made for distributed query processing and storing data in a way that supports that distributed query processing. And then make that available both on the operations side, just as you do with Couchbase today, also via analytical tools that you have plugged into your ecosystem. So just by a show of hands, does what I've called out as the existing ecosystem of analytics, does that resonate with people in the room? Is that a good representation of what your system is? Okay. 1, 2, there's quite a few. I'm sure Till and Mike are going to agree with me, but yes, there is quite a few. So that, in a nutshell, is in my view of describing like the problem that we're solving with Couchbase Analytics. As a product manager, you're always asked, like, what's your elevator pitch? Like, if you were to describe to somebody on the road in an elevator in one sentence, what are you doing with Couchbase Analytics? It's not too wordy, but essentially Couchbase Analytics enables organizations to derive rich real-time insights into the operational data. And the key thing to note here is that we let you do all of this without having any transformation. We let you ask questions of your data in the natural form that it is in, without having to transform it in any fashion. How does Couchbase Analytics really do that? Without going into the architectural detail, but at a very high level, architecture, as I like to call it, I think this is one slide that captures it really, really well. I'm going to start at the extreme left of this slide. The first thing you need is, as soon as the data is available in your ops store, I was showing a toy cluster in the keynote demo earlier today where we had 500,000 ops or 500,000 ops a second. That data has to be available for analytical processing really, really quickly if you're going to get insights from that data. That is where Couchbase has this database change protocol, DCP, which is a way in which we build replicas of our data and provide the ability to fail over the high availability capabilities in the traditional Couchbase ecosystem cluster. We use the same database change protocol to essentially have that data available as a shadow data set on the analytics side. So all of the data in your Couchbase data nodes is now available in analytics nodes, where it is stored in a format that Mike's going to cover in his talk that is really optimized for distributed query processing. And from there, because we're using the exact same protocol that we use for high availability today, we're able to basically make sure the data is available for analytical processing immediately. I wouldn't say real time, but I'd say near real time. And as you have your cluster set up and you play around with this, you will see that as soon as the data is in the KV engine, the data is instantaneously available for analytical processing as well. Now, that's great. It's all JSON data. Now, the big problem with JSON data is it's information. How do I actually make sense of that information? And that's where we've essentially introduced the concept of an MPP architecture for our query engine. This is something that's existed in the DBMS world for a very long time. We're bringing the same concepts that have existed in the DBMS space now for NoSQL data as well. So what you have with Couchbase Analytics is the ability to essentially split a query across multiple nodes. And then each node is working on a certain part of the query or working with a certain subset of the data to return the larger result set for the query. And all of that is aggregated and then provided back to you. What that gives you is the ability to essentially scale analytics in a linear fashion. What I demonstrated on stage earlier today was adding a new node in 4 clicks, 4 or 5 depending on who you ask. What that gives you is the ability to scale your cluster in real time. And depending on the types of queries that you're running and the types of queries that you would like to run, you can actually scale up or scale down as need be. Now, this is all great. I have all of my data available. I have a distributed query engine that is going to allow me to ask interesting questions of my data. But I am interested in visualization. I think if you think about analytics, visualization is very much hanging out there, is in the room. And if you don't have a good visualization story, then there's a lot of questions that get asked. So what we've done is our strategy is very simple. We don't want to come and disrupt your ecosystem. We want to work with the tools that exist in your ecosystem today. So we work with the best of breed tools that are out there. We actually have 2 partners presenting as a part of the analytics track. The first one, Noe, which is a native visualization tool vendor. Which is a visualization tool vendor that is natively integrated with Couchbase. That I can show after we go through these slides is like really, really easy to set up. Any queries that you want to run on the analytics Workbench, the exact same queries can be run via Noe, and then the results can be visualized using whatever charts you'd like to use, whether it's a map, a bar chart, a column, a stacked column, and like, I'm not even the expert in that area, but there's a bunch of things that you can do there. That's the native integration with Couchbase. Now, there are many situations where you already have a Tableau, a Power BI, a Cognos, or whatever have you, a Looker, the list goes on and on and on. So what we've done is our strategy is to create a ODBC, JDBC driver for accessing data in Couchbase Analytics that can then be materialized or visualized in one of those more traditional tools. So as a part of the analytics track, the second partner session that we have is from CData, which is one of our partners that actually has built a ODBC, JDBC driver for Couchbase. And as a part of that demo, they're going to show how to visualize the data on Tableau, on Power BI, and probably one more tool. And yes, and Excel as well. So that gives you the ability to have that information natively available in Excel. So at a conceptual level, with analytics, what we have is fast ingest, which means the data is available almost immediately. The ability to query that data without knowing what queries or what questions you want to run, and then visualize that data in real time using the tools of your choice. So with that, let me, I don't know if you've, show of hands, has anybody played around with previous developer previews of Couchbase Analytics? All right, that's a bunch of Couchbase people, somebody not from Couchbase, and then one in the back. So I'd like to give you take you on a journey, if you will, today, just to give you a sense of like, this is not something we've come up with like in the last 6 months or last 8 months. This has been a journey that we embarked on actually a year before the first developer preview came out. So I'm talking about November 2015, and Mike and Till can keep me honest here. But essentially, this is a baby that's been 3 years in the making. The first developer preview of analytics came out in November 2016. And since then, we've been slowly but steadily adding functionality to Couchbase Analytics. There was DPs pretty much like, yeah, I can't say if there's a 6-month window over there or not, because there are times when we had DPs less than 6 months, but approximately around that, maybe a quarter, once a quarter, where we've added functionality. And now we are at the stage where it's beta right now, and the GA is imminent. The gentleman responsible for the GA is right here. So once he comes on stage, we can put him on the spot and ask him the exact GA date. But the thing I'd like to talk about here is that it's been a long journey, and we've been working on this for a while. This is not an easy problem to solve. And when we go into the architecture deep dive, you will see all of the hard conversations, the hard decisions that had to be made behind the architecture. So to bring what we have, Couchbase Analytics, to you guys and gals here today. That's great. In the end, from a customer perspective, what are the benefits? Like, why do I even care? So here's a laundry list. I'm going to probably be repeating some of this, but this is important to know that number one, there's fast ingest. The ops data, which is coming to the Couchbase cluster, we're using the exact same protocol that we use for replication, which is database change protocol, or DCP as we call it, makes the data available in real time, almost in real time, very immediately, or the immediate availability of the data is a good way of describing it. You're able to get real-time insights because not only is the data available, but it has a query engine that is built on the MPP principles, on an MPP architecture, is able to essentially distribute query processing across multiple nodes. So for example, if you have a really, really complex query, and in the session yesterday we had, in the workshop yesterday, we had Peter and Doug go through like a bunch of complicated queries. If you feel your query processing is slowing down, you can add nodes and add to the cluster, the horsepower of the cluster, and get real-time insights without having to go boil the ocean, if you will. At the same time, a key thing to highlight here is that it is no ETL for no SQL. What I mean by that is that you have the ability to query JSON data in its natural format. What I mean by that is, I'll probably show this with an example a little bit later, but if you had a JSON array, or if you have a JSON object, how do you actually, in your query language, have the ability to query JSON object as is, or a JSON array as is, without having to know or essentially flatten that out or transform it in a different fashion? From a complexity perspective, hopefully we have a few folks who have had the experience of running multiple systems. You are essentially doing layer consolidation. So with Couchbase, because you're getting the, as I like to call it, the full enchilada, you're getting all of the capabilities. Like if you look at the history of Couchbase, we started as a key value pair. We became a document store. Then we added the indexing capability. Then we had the mobile capability. With full text search, we had an inverted index. And now with analytics, you have the ability to interact with your data without having pre-created indexes. So the complexity of managing multiple systems goes away, and you can have one single data platform for managing all of your workloads. The most relevant one for this conversation being analytics. From a development perspective, is anybody in the room not familiar with SQL? Okay, I thought so as well. So everybody in the room knows SQL, and if you have existing SQL skills, hopefully you've gotten the book from Don Chamberlain, the father of SQL, which is SQL++ for SQL users, which essentially shows you what you can do with the complexity of JSON, the nested objects, the arrays, and how you can actually bring in your SQL skills and not have to learn everything from scratch, which is definitely the case with some of the competitors who have the same capabilities or claim to have similar capabilities. The security, again, we have access control built in. So if you have an ops team and an analytics team and you want to have different access controls built for them, you can use the Couchbase user management to create users who just have like rights on the analytics side so that they cannot come and muck around with your operational cluster. And last but not the least, enterprise ready. This is again a part of the Couchbase platform. Now, all the goodness of the Couchbase Data Platform, those design tenets are also applicable to analytics as well. And we continue to essentially be enterprise ready as a part of our journey towards GA. All right, so one of the key questions that we get asked is, all right, analytics is another type of querying, but you do have a query service. There is this thing called the query service that's been a part of Couchbase since 4.0. So what is the difference between what you have right now and what you're introducing with analytics. To me, the easiest way to address this is via an example. So what I'm going to do is just take the example of, let's say, a hospitality company. Let's assume that you're somebody who's running an e-commerce website for a hospitality company, and then you have this online hotel booking experience where you have a bunch of things that are shown to users. You have I shouldn't say a shopping cart, but essentially the ability to book a room. If you're in the booking process, the room will be blocked for like 15 minutes or so, whatever the right answer is over there. You've got like the property details on the web page. You've got like the links to cross-sell, upsell. There is the information about like how many people like this hotel, didn't enjoy their stay at the hotel. This is all of the things that you know that you'd like to display to your users. So you know exactly the information that you'd like to display to those users. That's where the nickel or the query service is very, very relevant. So you have pre-configured indexes that give you the ability to have really, really fast access to all of the data that exists in your data store and be able to show that to users in sub-millisecond or millisecond response time. That is something that is really, really important for a great e-commerce experience. Let me just change that persona a little bit and think about I'm a business user or a business owner for this hospitality company, and I have 50 hotels that I'm managing today. What sort of questions would I like to ask of the data? So this is very different from the kind of data that you'd be processing if you're building the e-commerce experience. The questions could be like, can I have a report of like how many rooms were occupied across, let's say, all of California in the hotels that I own, or maybe across all of the United States? And then could I figure that out, like group that by the city? So instead of grouping it by state, I want to group it by city. And again, the list of questions can go on endlessly. What was the region that saw the biggest drop in terms of room occupancy? Or what was the region that saw the biggest drop in terms of the hotel, the nightly rate price? There's like a bunch of questions that you'd want to ask. You start exploring the data. And then as you explore the data, the number of questions you want to ask keep on increasing. So this is more a business analyst or a business operations persona where you have a bunch of questions that you'd want to ask of your data, but in the query service world, which is before analytics, if you didn't have the right indexes, that was just not possible. It was going to be really, really painfully slow, and it was going to be really, really hard. But with analytics, you have the ability to ask all of these questions and then create whatever reports and dashboards you'd want to for your users. The way I think about it is I call it the query lifecycle. So start with like, if I'm the business analyst persona, I don't know what queries I'm going to be running, so I'm using Couchbase Analytics. I start running those queries, and then I explore my data, I figure out what are the key tenets that I'm interested in. Once that is done, I can then go back and decide that this is a report that I'd like to generate every hour, every 15 minutes, every 20 minutes, or maybe this is some information that I want to push back to all of my application users or the end users. So depending on how you want to do that, you can think of either using analytics if you want to get to the application users where there's a bunch of people that are running those queries at scale. You can use the capability of the query service with the indexes out there. So let me pause there and see if there's any questions, because this is something that gets asked repeatedly, and I'd like to see if there's any questions from the audience on this specific aspect. Sure.
Yeah, that's a good comparison between query service and analytics, and as I understand it, it's kind of a scatter-gather model for the analytics query. How does that compare with the views, having a MapReduce view of the data?
So, I haven't paid much attention to the MapReduce views right now, but maybe we can talk offline about how MapReduce views would compare with the query service and the analytics service.
Okay.
All right, any other questions? Sure.
So, how is the indexing or the views works on this one? So views in the previous versions were always a performance bottom.
Yes.
And can we create those, or how about the indexes? Are they available?
Sure. So the question is that views were not recommended to be used previously because of performance bottlenecks. On the analytics side, do you support indexing? Would that be your question? So the answer to that is yes. We'd still say don't use views because there are performance challenges with that. Now, on the analytics side, as you want to speed up your query, so for example, instead of running the query every 15 minutes and taking 10 seconds to run it, you wanted to run it like every 10 seconds and have it return in like a couple of seconds, if you will, or maybe a few 100 milliseconds, then what you can do is you can create an index. You can create an index in the analytics side as well to support your queries. But what that means is that you're in your exploration process as a business analyst, you've actually progressed in your journey. So you've explored the data and then you've come to a certain report that is interesting for you. Then that becomes a part of your business process, and then having an index for that report that's going to be run like 10, 100, 200, whatever times in a day would make total sense over there. So for that particular use case, we do have the indexing capability in analytics as well. Does that answer the question? Thank you. Sure.
How does a query service distinguish between a nickel query on the data service and the analytical service?
So
It's the same query service that serves both the data.
those are two separate services. So for using analytics, again, I can bring this up in the demo as well. So we have the query workbench and the analytics workbench. So when you're executing queries on the query workbench, it's going off the query service. When you're executing queries on the analytics workbench, it's coming to the analytics service, right? And then if you're invoking this from the SDK, we have different methods that you need to essentially, we have the same method. You have the same method with a different flag to say which service to go to. Exactly. So you have the ability to distinguish between those two. And as a part of this, in a few slides, actually I'll get done with slides soon. Let me go to the actual product and show you how this works. All right, one more.
One more question regarding the performance. So basically, as part of the same cluster, we will have the analytics servers running,
Yes.
as well as the transaction or the operational ones. Right?
Yes.
So, and all the cluster URL or the top one will be the same, because like you were showing in the previous one, right? And so there won't be any performance issues in the operational side, and how you are making sure.
So yeah, that's workload isolation. What we can do is I can actually walk you through in more details offline right after the session, as Peter's like egging me on to go move forward. Oh, okay, sorry. So the question is that how do you make sure that there is no degradation in performance of the operational side when you're running the analytical queries? So again, that is building on the core design principle of workload isolation. That's very much a part of the Couchbase platform. So when you're running analytical queries, the only thing that is happening is that there's a shadow copy of the data set that is coming from your operational cluster to the analytics cluster. So the easiest way to think of it is that the same technology that we're using for replicating data to another node so that there is high availability, we're using the exact same technology for getting data in the analytics node as well. So beyond that, everything else is happening on the analytics side, which is a special separate node, specialized node for analytical processing. So that doesn't interfere with what's going on in your operational cluster. If you wanted to, with analytics, you have the ability to turn on, turn off the shadowing of the data and basically have the flexibility where you wanted to like even have a subset of the data being available for analytical processing if need be.
But how do you route the traffic for the analytics to go hit these particular clusters?
So that is all. So again, the next question is then how do you route the traffic to go hit the analytics service as opposed to the query service? So that is all magic depending on whether you're using the analytics workbench or the query workbench. That's a part of the workbench itself. If you're using the SDK, you've got to specify using the flag, if I'm right, Matt, which service you want to hit. So all of that magic is transparent to you, but happening under the hoods with either the SDK or the admin console. All right, there is a couple more questions. All right, we'll start here and then we'll come to you.
The data service and the analytics service, do they use the same index? Or
So with the analytics service, the way because it's an exploration use case, we are not mandating that you need indexes. With the data service, you absolutely need indexes. But the indexing is separate from the data service and the analytics service. So if you create an index on the data side, that's not applicable on the analytics side, and vice versa.
So how do you segregate those indexes?
So the indexing on the analytics side, and I'm sure Mike's going to cover it as a part of his talk, so I'm not going to try and answer that question in its totality, but it's very much a part of how we're storing data on the analytics side. So more on that in Mike's talk. Like I promised, we've got like a bunch of experts that are going to cover some of this stuff. And there was a question in the back as well. So the answer to that is absolutely. So the way to think about it is that we have a distributed system. So you can add capacity to the cluster if your data gets really, really unwindy. Now, the big challenge with an approach with what you're describing is that right now, the way analytics service works is that your data has to be in the Couchbase data node, and that's how it's available for analytical processing. Now, if your Couchbase node is sized for 100 gigs, you've got 100 gigs over here as well. So you have the ability to play around with it. The two things that the analytics service needs is, number one, the ability to store the data, whether in memory or on disk, and you can decide what that proportion would be. And then the second thing is the ability to essentially run queries on that. So what's the query throughput that you need? So again, I would love to run into an issue where we've run into a bottleneck with performance. That's actually what would give me a lot of pleasure, because I can go back and bug that guy over there. But I'm happy to chat with you offline about the specifics of your use case. And the beta is out there. I would love for you to download it, try it, and tell us what you think. And if you run into issues, I'd be a happy camper, because then I can go back and bug it. All right. All right, one more.
So how much computing power would you expect to need on a decent-sized e-commerce site?
So, all right, I don't want to give you an answer that, I'm sorry?
Tell us what he asked, please.
Yeah, sorry, yeah. So how much computing power would you need for a decent-sized e-commerce site? So I'll have to figure out what you mean by a decent-sized e-commerce site, number one. Number two, what I'd also like to understand is this a user profile use case? I'll give you an example of, I'm not going to name the customer, but a customer that I've been working with is actually analyzing their shopping cart data. So they use Couchbase for all of their shopping cart data, and then they want to run like ad hoc queries on top of that shopping cart data. So all we needed to do was make sure that they had, and again, they don't have a very high query throughput requirement, and they're okay with like taking 10 seconds for the query to execute. So just by adding a few nodes to their cluster, I wouldn't say like the nodes were not powerful enough, but they were able to start doing ad hoc analysis on their shopping cart data. But again, that would depend on this, number one, the size of your data, and number two, the query throughput that you require. A good back-of-the-envelope calculation for this would be to, depending on the number of gigabytes you have or petabytes you have, whatever the answer is over there, look at the number of cores that you would need. So I'm actually working with our field team, actually Peter and the team, on creating a sizing guide. So by the time we go GA, which is another month and a half, or whereabouts, I'm not giving any timelines. We would have a sizing guide that'll give you a better sense of how much it would need, or what sort of additional horsepower you would need to run analytics.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, one more question.
As a follow-up question, actually, so is there any autoscaling feature you're working on for adding more data nodes, company nodes to your?
I'm sorry?
Is there any autoscaling feature you're?
Autoscaling feature. All right, so the question is there an autoscaling feature that we are working on for adding new analytics nodes as? All right, So the answer to that right now is, let me go back and check with my counterpart who's working on the Kubernetes piece, because we could potentially manage this as a part of the Kubernetes cluster itself. But then I think autoscaling, I'd say, is not something that we've planned so far. And the reason for that is that even if your cluster is growing and you're adding more data nodes, it is not 100% apparent to me, or it's not something that we can conclude that you want to add additional analytics nodes, because with the same number of analytics nodes, you'd still be able to query your data. Your query throughput, or the amount of time it takes to query that data, might go up a little bit. So again, it's a very interesting question, and I'm happy to chat with you offline. I'm not gonna, I know which organization you're from, so I'll work with the account team, and we'll come learn more about your use case. But I'd say that it's one of those things where we need to build the rules, the logic on, like, is this an autoscaling requirement right now, or as an organization, I'm okay with my analytic query taking, like, instead of 10 seconds, 15 seconds. Yes, Fidancio.
So for the expiration of documents, when you do the replication, is that expiration transferred? And if so, how would you manage the case where I want to get a snapshot of analytics, but the document can expire in like 5 minutes?
So this is an often asked request. In fact, as Peter was saying in the workshop yesterday, this is a standard product management answer, a product manager answer. It's a feature that's on my laundry list of things to consider. In fact, I'm working with quite a few customers that have asked this repeatedly. Like, look, I'll take the shopping cart example. I have, let's say, my operational cluster optimized for 1 month worth of data. But when I'm analyzing it, I want 6 months worth of data. So very similar to what you're asking, it's not possible right now, but certainly something that we are considering for the future. All right. So with that, I didn't want to take too much time on the slides, but let me also cover partnerships, because it's important to see that. Maybe what I can do after this is bring up maybe the Jupyter Notebook. I'll see how much time we have. So so there's a bunch of visualization tools that are out there. We're using Noe, which is what I demoed earlier today. I'm happy to bring that up again, which is a really, really easy way for you to push all of your query processing to Couchbase Analytics and just have the end result visualized in a fairly compelling web UI. For the more traditional ones, we have ODBC, JDBC driver. CData, a partner of ours, is actually a part of the track. They're going to showcase this. Now, if you're one of those companies that is trying to do a whole bunch of machine learning stuff, this is where my pitch is that you will have, using Couchbase Analytics, the data available for query. Now, whether you want to use a Jupyter kind of an interface where, thanks to Matt's team, I have a working example of pulling data from Couchbase Analytics and loading that into a pandas data frame. Not just visualizing it, but loading that into a pandas data frame. And then from there, the data scientists can go and build whatever models that they need to. I personally would need a course before I can do any of that. And last but not the least, we also have a Spark connector, where you can bring in the capabilities of Spark MLib into Couchbase Analytics. So all the data is available. If you want to use Spark and its capabilities, that is possible today with Couchbase Analytics as well. So with all of this, I think the one thing that I like to talk about is pricing. So this is for those of us who are evaluating analytics. I don't want it to be something that you discover late in the cycle. So first of all, the licensing is simple. The objective for licensing was that it's got to be like straightforward for people to understand. So we have different types of services that you can purchase 10 nodes from Couchbase, and you can choose which service you want over there, whether it's analytics, data service, mobile, whatever have you. We wanted to keep the same thing going. The only thing different is that Couchbase Analytics is Enterprise Edition only. So if you want to use Couchbase Analytics, you would have to be on the Enterprise Edition of the platform. All right, so that's all that I had in terms of slides. So what I'm going to do is switch over real quick to the console that I used earlier this morning. So I've basically cleaned up the cluster, and I am trying to save on our AWS bill. And the reason for that is that marketing has me on a tight budget, so anything I save is fair game at the bar tonight. And I'm just going to bring up the cluster. So if you remember from the demo earlier today, I had added a new node to the deployment. So I have 2 analytics nodes, and I have the data service and eventing deployed on this cluster. So I was talking about the query workbench and the analytics workbench. Let me show you what I mean by that. So this is the query workbench. There's a bunch of indexes that you need to pre-create for running any queries on the query workbench. So let me see if I can do a select star from cars, limit 10. Oops, if I can remember to type. There you go. So the message that you're getting over here is that, look, you've got to have your indexes built for querying any of this data. I mean, take the same query. I'm going to copy paste the damn thing. Shouldn't say that. Sorry, Mike. I will open up I'll just do the new tab so that I can go back there easily. And my username and password, like all of my demos, is a very secure password, PASSWORD. And this is right now in the analytics workbench. So you see on the left-hand side of the menu, this is where I am. I execute this. And I'm limiting this to 10 so that this is easy for me to understand. But you'd see that I actually am able to access my data. There was no index that I had to create. I didn't have to do any of this ahead of time. This is where data exploration becomes really, really important and really, really interesting. Let me go into my history and see if I have one of the queries that I'd like to. So yeah, I'm going to copy paste that off my notes. So what I did was I basically, during the connected car demo, just to recap that interface, cars sending data back, and there is a particular reading that was on which said that your tire pressure monitoring system indicator is on. All right, let's check it out. There's like a bunch of cars that are sending that information. So let's actually pay a little more attention to this data model, because this is quite interesting. So I have the key value pairs on JSON, and then there is this indicators object. Is this visible in the back of the room, or should I? No? Yeah. Because I think in this audience, I can actually scroll up and down. It was going to be harder on the screen. So if you look at this object over here, so I have the key value pairs visible right now. Okay. So ABS is on, off. What is my engine temperature? And then there is all of these indicators. That's an object. So I have indicator.brake pedal and all of that. Then the location is coming as the latitude and longitude of the car is coming as in the location object itself. Is not coming in the format that potentially a visualization tool would use. And then the other thing over here is like this object, which is quite interesting, the tire pressure. This is an array of objects. Now, right now I'm getting values from 4 tires within a car. I could potentially tomorrow start manufacturing trucks, so I'm getting values from 6 tires. How do I interact with this data? And the claim here is that you can interact with this data in its natural JSON form without transformation. So let me get my cool query in and show you that. So oops, let me get back into the query editor, and can you see this query? So what I'm doing is I'm saying cars or tire pressure. So this part of the query, I'm going to highlight this to show you what I mean by this. So cars to tire pressure is a JSON array. And what I'm saying is that every value in that JSON array has to be greater than 30, which means that the tire pressure value is not an issue. And I'm able to run this query right now and figure out, like, is my tire pressure monitoring system still on, although my tire pressure values are okay. And that's processing a JSON object. So again, there's a bunch of data coming in. But I basically process this JSON data, the tire pressure, without flattening that array, without having to make any changes to that array. That is really, really powerful. And again, I'm not going to go too much into the query language because still has a full session on the query language, but this is what I'd like to highlight. When we say we're bringing NoETL to NoSQL, this is what we mean. You have JSON in its natural form that you can process. You can run whatever queries that you want to run. So again, not in my defense, this is not a very typical analytical query. I'm just exploring data. The queries that Till and probably Peter run every day are like a lot more complicated. But this shows you the point that there's no transformation required over here. That's why the whole tagline of NoETL for NoSQL came about. So let me also, with this, show you another thing, which is I'm going to go back to my visualization dashboard. And I'm going to just refresh this so that this is the latest. And is this? Yeah, it's still working. My internet connection is sometimes a little flaky. Give it a second. All right. So how did I build this dashboard? So let me show you. What I did was, if I click on data sources, yeah. Okay. My net connection is a little slow. Oops. Something happened. No, it's right here.
It's been kind of flaky for a while. So
Oh, really?
short, yeah.
Okay. And
We're going to get him to take a look at that after the session is over, so don't worry.
yeah, that's fine. I am on Couchbase. Maybe I should switch to iPhone, Sachin, because that might be a more reliable network. The Wi-Fi here can sometimes be a little testy. So let me switch on my personal hotspot and see if I can use that. Give it a second.
The problem is that we don't see your screen.
Oh, there we go. There we go. And you can see that I actually have, so I'm going to go to one of my favorite sites. I'm a cricket fan, so I'm just going to click info to make sure my network is up. And hopefully this is going to come. Okay, there we go. So this site is working. So I'm going to go to Noe and I'm going to refresh my page. Oh, this is again flaky. This is gone again. You can't see what I'm seeing. Oops. Yeah, I thought this was easy. All right, like any other live demo, the internet is not working and the display is not working. But I was going to recap what we showed you in the keynote earlier today and how easy it was to build in like 5 minutes or less this afternoon. But I think we can pause here and that should be it.
All right, we really want to thank you, Sachin, for coming in. And I can tell you, Sachin answers questions for alcohol, okay? There's a reception tonight. He will stick around and answer questions as long as you want if you're buying. This is correct, isn't it, Sachin?
Absolutely.
Okay, so we get our lunch break now, or we get it in 1 minute. So I want to thank Sachin for putting this presentation together. We've got really good stuff this afternoon. We have Till, we have Mike, we have Steve Wyatt from the Cincinnati Reds. So we've got the best material of all. So looking forward to having you back here 1 o'clock sharp. Thanks very much for attending.
Thank you.